All right.
No, we are going to. You will know when we start.
Okay.
We are ready to start.
Okay. You went?
No, I will
Okay.
start.
All right.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for accepting my invitation at a very, very tough time for you. This is the starting point, but you personally and your family actually are at the starting point. Tell us a little bit about that. You're going to make a big change.
We are, and we have been in the Atlanta area, or Lilburn, for 15 years. I've been in the Atlanta area since '99, so almost 20. And I've been taking care of my mother for the last 5 years. My brother lives in Washington State. He lives in Walla Walla. To make it a little easier for my mom, for her care, for both of us to be involved in that, we thought that being in the proximity of where he lives would be good. But that wasn't the only reason. Unfortunately, she won't always be the reason. So we've been wanting to make a change. My son has been at the Atlanta North School since kindergarten. He just graduated, 8th grade. We wanted more options for Adventist schools for him. Adventist education is very important to us. We have some great options here, but the one option that we would consider is a boarding school option, and we would he just is not. We wanted to keep him home. So we would move to Calhoun to make that work, and we figured if we're going to make a big move like that, maybe we should make one that's a little bit more permanent and one that will fit our family better. And my husband loves the West Coast. A couple of years ago, God put something in his mind. He went on a business trip to Boise, Idaho, and he came back and he had looked in the area and looked at housing, and it prompted us to go on a research trip last year after school was out, and we visited 8 schools. And then we had lots of options. We were thinking of the Spokane area, Upper Columbia Academy, and when we got back, we were like, man, there are too many options. So we prayed, Lord, shut the door on, give us some lead where you want us to be. And then a day later, AT&T, where my husband works, made a change in policy where there are only certain cities that his job could go with him. And all of the cities that we were considering were off the list except the Seattle area. So we figured maybe that was. So he'll be going to Auburn Adventist Academy. We'll be living south of Seattle. And we're excited about it. I'm anxious to get on the other side of it, though. The move it's very, very, very time-consuming, stressful, and you're trying to do other things in between. And if the Lord will pack my house, nothing's impossible. I keep remembering I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So I'm living by that.
You are a very social person. How it will be to separate yourself from the long-standing connections and to start all over again.
It's very hard. I did it when I came to Atlanta. I was very strongly involved in my church in Virginia, where I came from. When I got here, it didn't take me very long to get involved in a church here. As a matter of fact, I met my husband very soon after I got here. I mean, the Lord laid a plan for me. So I imagine he'll lay a plan for me as well. I'm hoping to be kind of quiet in my new church, and
you hope?
Just enjoy, not just be a member for a little while.
That's kind of a hope against any hope.
Oh, something like that. But it's not, as we both know, it's not always up to me. So it's never up to me. So if you're under God's hand and you're being led by Him, you don't get to stay quiet for very long. So.
We have anticipated a little bit what's ahead of you. But now let's move back and tell us a few things about your starting point in life, about your family, some early memories.
I was born in Alexandria, Virginia. My family, I have, there are 4. It's just me and my brother, my mom, and my dad. My dad was in the Army, but he just did his 4 years. He served during the Korean War, but he never saw combat. But he decided his family he didn't want to move them around. So he got out of the Army and started working for the Army as a civilian.
Yes.
And did so for 25 some odd years. And he also thought it would be important to not be in the middle of the city. So they found this house that they rented from a farmer in Wilderness, Virginia. We literally grew up on the Wilderness battlefield. The government did not own it at the time, and while we were living there, the government purchased it from the people who owned our home. But they were allowed to live there, work the land as long as they were alive, so we were allowed to live in our home as well. I missed school one day to watch a horse foal. It was wonderful living there. 700 acres of nothing. Our nearest neighbors were half a mile up the field. You literally walked the field to get there. If you walked the road, it took longer. It was just a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up. And we lived there until my father wanted to be closer to his family, and for a few years moved us to Ohio. And when I was ready to go back to academy, or go to academy in 9th grade, my brother had gone to Shenandoah Valley Academy in Virginia. And Virginia was just always my home. And I wanted to go back. And so my family packed up and moved. And the house we had lived in before was available.
Oh, man.
And we were able to move back. So that was very, very providential. I mean, I think God was in that process all along. And I went to Shenandoah Valley Academy, graduated from there, didn't really know what to do with my life. And I had been, Adventism had been such a strong part. Now, I skipped a little bit there. When I was 7,
Yes.
my mother was going through some severe depression, and she had just lost someone very close to her, and she was in a very hopeless state. And we didn't really know how to handle that. My father didn't know how to handle that. And a friend of ours, our piano teacher, in fact, also not an Adventist, had heard about these meetings in Fredericksburg, Virginia, not far from where we lived. And she called my mom one night and said, there are these meetings going on, would you like to come? She knew my mom was going through some things, so she called and said, would you like to come with me? Well, she didn't even tell us where she was going. She just said, I'm going to go with Mrs. Booth. We're gonna go out for a little bit. I'll be back. And my father wanted to know, it doesn't matter. We'll be back. And whenever she left, things were so bad that when she left, my father always worried about whether or not she would come back. And it was that bad. And
Excuse me, how it was for you to have a mother in such a difficult
it was
condition?
scary. It was very
Quite
scary.
dysfunctional.
Yeah, it was scary. It was dysfunctional. Living in the country was good. My brother and I, when my mother would have some of her, she got angry a lot with my dad mostly. She got angry with us sometimes too, but she was a great mom. Just really was going through a rough time, and it just causes discourse in relationships. And when my mom and dad would have arguments, my brother and I would kind of escape the house. We had a tree house that we would go to, and then we also had a fort my brother had built at the top of a hill. And we would go hang out there until we thought things had calmed down, and then we'd go back. My brother took good care of me. So.
He was older than you, your brother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so back to your mom being invited to those meetings.
Right. So she was invited to the meetings, and the first meeting that she went into was the Mark of the Beast. And when she came back,
Very soothing, very.
yes, not the first meeting. Clearly, she was in the middle or towards the end, and
Yes.
That is not usually the meeting that you bring someone in. But God knew what He was talking about, and so she came back, or what He was doing, and she came back to the house, and she was talking about all this stuff that she'd heard, and my father looked at us and said, "She's finally lost her mind." If she has gone off the deep end, it's over. We have to get her help. I mean, what is she talking about? The numbers, the animals, the Daniel. What is she talking about? The statue, the feet. I don't understand.
Of course.
But she was so excited, and he hadn't seen that in a long time in her. So he. She said, you all have to come with me to the next meeting. It's tomorrow night. He decided to go just to make her happy. And we thought it was the greatest thing ever because back then, the children's meetings, and I wish they would do this more now, and I think some churches still do, but the children's programs were just as strong as the adult programs. And as we've learned, children follow their, parents follow their children.
Yes.
So we begged to go back. And if it hadn't been for how strong the children's programs were, I don't know if my parents would have continued, but they did. And my brother, my mom, and my dad were baptized that year.
Including your
Within the
dad?
year. Yes, including my father.
Wow.
And then I was baptized, so I was only 7 at the time, and then I was baptized 2 years later when I was 9. And it was better. I mean, things don't magically get better.
Of course.
But she had something that she didn't have before, and that was hope. She had been given something that she didn't have before. We'd always been a Christian. We actually are Christians. We went to the Baptist church nearby. We were strong, involved in that, but she knew there was something missing. She wasn't getting from that what she needed. The pastor of the church that we ended up being members of was we ended up having a relationship with him long after. He was at that church, long after we were at the church. Very strong, vivacious, funny, and just to the point. But the other thing, it was in the early 70s, and in the early 70s, when you had a visitation, after you were ready to be baptized, and someone like an elder would come to your church or to your home, and he'd visit with you. And this particular elder was very old school Adventist, different from the pastor that we knew. And he came with this very long list of don'ts. And initially, you can't do this from sundown. It was like as soon as sundown Friday hit, the curtain come down, and you couldn't do anything. You could go to church, but that was it. You could maybe eat, but that was it. Eat. Right, exactly. I mean, my parents were kind of scared, and my brother and I initially, we didn't like the Sabbath. We dreaded the Sabbath. It was boring, finally, we loved church because there were people and there was stuff happening. But then you got home, and if you ate dinner, and if you were fortunate, someone may come over and stay, and that made things a little more exciting. But if there weren't people there, then your parents go take a nap because they don't know what else to do. And no, you can't leave the house. You can't do this. You can't go for a walk. We don't think you're allowed to do this. Now, they hadn't told us that, but they just made it so stringently legalistic that they just wanted to follow the letter to, what does remember the Sabbath day really mean? And not too long into our walk with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we met a couple by the name of Rink and Penny, who became our godparents. And they invited us one Sabbath afternoon to go with them and eat a picnic and just go into the mountains. And we went because they had been Adventists a long time, so surely it's okay. But my mother was questioning it the whole way. Is this okay? And we found a place where we stopped, and there was a stream, and some of the other people had gone as well, and some of the people we knew from the church. It was kind of a caravan that went. And we ate a picnic, and we built a dam in the creek, and some of the older kids climbed the mountain. And my mother is sitting there, is this okay? Is this okay? And finally, things started to relax a little bit, and because of these people, we finally learned that you can actually enjoy the Sabbath. It's okay to breathe. You can, to do certain things. So that made life a lot easier, and my brother and I embraced the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
So after that, you went to Adventist school?
Yes, I was in probably second or third grade. Through third grade, I was in public school, and then in fourth grade, I started going to the church school.
Did you enjoy it, or it was again a place full of rules? Don't do this.
No, I did enjoy it. It was very different, but it was friendlier.
Yes.
I felt I excelled academically. No, except with math.
I see.
But I did enjoy it, and as I said, I embraced it when I got into my academy years. Going to an Adventist academy was important to me.
Good. Let's
Okay.
take a leap.
Leap out, right.
Yes. Now you are at the time when you think on working, having a career. What were
Well,
thoughts on that?
so first, I graduated from academy, and I wasn't really sure what to do with my life. I was floundering a little bit, and to be honest, I had been hit really hard with Ellen White, Adventist rules, and I was maybe spreading my wings a little bit in the wrong direction. But there was an Adventist hospital opening up in Florida, Zephyr Hills, as a matter of fact, and we knew some people in Virginia that had a daughter that was about to have a baby, and she needed some help in her home. They offered to let me stay in their house and work at the brand new hospital there, just to see, and that was in Zephyr Hills, Florida. So $50, clothes and shoes, whatever I had, and I went down with them and stayed with them and got myself established in the Florida area. Worked there for about a year, started as a dishwasher and worked my way into the admissions office.
Oh.
And then I went to the Orlando area, started working in various doctors' offices, still wasn't sure, but was leaning toward wanting to go into law. But I found myself also sort of in a help field type environment as well, and I was kind of on the fence as to which direction to go. And I was hired by a prominent law firm in the Orlando area and worked there as a paralegal for 6.5 years. It was a personal injury law firm, but I worked for the top attorneys, so we handled a lot of wrongful death cases and some of the bigger injury cases.
Interesting.
So there is a little bit of medical in that as well. Outside of that, towards the end of that, I was also going to school, and I took political science and pre-law, and I wanted to maybe work for a lobbying organization, and I wanted to relocate back to Washington, D.C. and Virginia. Again, Virginia drawing me, back. I wanted to be back there, and I had a friend, a very long time family friend, who had a basement and offered to allow me to live there until I got on my feet. And I started applying for internships and jobs, trying to figure out what I could do. And I was offered an internship to work for a lobbying organization for children's rights. It was called the Children's Rights Council.
Excuse me, lobbying. There is no translation of that term in Romanian, and we use that word, but maybe we don't have a tradition.
Okay.
And maybe some of our viewers need a little explanation. I've read that the word comes actually from the name of a room or a hallway close to the like meeting place, meeting place of legislators, where some lawmakers would meet their constituents or other guests, and so kind of interactions and influence. Explain a little bit the term.
So you're right. The term actually comes from where people gather, much like the lobby of a church. And so people of influence, people with clout, as it will, a congressman or a senator, a board member. I mean, it could be, it depends on what level you're at, but on Capitol Hill, it's where people who wanted their voice heard or their issues raised or a bill passed would try to influence a member of Congress or a senator or someone in influence with the ability to make a difference, would push their interests. And that's what lobbying really is you're speaking for a special interest. This particular interest that I was hired, or that I had the internship for, and of course internships, you don't get paid, But I was fortunate that I was living basically for free,
Yes.
and I was able to establish myself there. And getting into an internship allows you to meet other people. And you know what an internship is, correct?
Yeah,
So that, well, when it was a very interesting issue, and I'm more of a conservative, so the firm that I was hired to work with was more liberal. But because it was the beginning of 1995 and the Republicans had just taken majority of the House and the Senate, I had a little bit more of an ability to knock on the door and get in the door than the people that I worked with.
Yes.
So I was the one that got up and started literally knocking on doors of members' offices and pushing an issue called, it was such that, families that are broken up because of poverty or divorce, or perhaps there's a family member in jail or some sort of issue. Children often get put in the public system of foster care away from the family, but some without looking to see if there's a family member that's able to take care of them. Well, this particular issue that we were fighting for was, well, what we want is to keep them in the family until their real parents can get back into taking care of them, instead of putting them in the permanent foster care system, which is very difficult to get back out of. If the parents can take care of them, sometimes they can't get their children back. So we were working towards making that change.
To make into a law,
To make it into a law.
To become a piece of legislation,
But when we discovered that we couldn't do that, my job was to get language into the welfare reform package that they were trying to accomplish during the first 100 days. And I don't know if you remember the contract with America that Newt Gingrich started, and that's when he was Speaker of the House. I got to meet him and work with the legislators. It was a very exciting time to be up there. And I spent way more time on the Hill than I did in the office where I worked. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. It wasn't exactly the issue that I chose for myself, but I sort of feel like the issue chose me.
Yes.
But it did give me an opportunity to meet people. It gave me an opportunity to find out what I could do. But I also found, so let me get back to that. I don't want to lose my, so when we found that we couldn't make it into an actual law, we needed to get it into language. And in order to do that, one way of doing that is to get a Dear Colleague letter, and certain members sign that letter to say, we support this and want it in the package. We want it included in the bill. It may not have been signed into law, but the bill that was signed by the president did have the language in it that we were working toward.
I see.
Very hard work, very long work, 16-hour days.
Really?
For a sentence. But that's what you do. That's what the work in Washington is all about.
Polishing and nuances.
Working your way, getting invited to receptions, getting invited to dinners, and you're not only pushing your issue, but you're also pushing yourself. People are noticing you. You're in Washington. It's your job is to work to get your next job. But remember, I was just doing an internship, and I did need, my internship was going to end, and I needed to find a job on Capitol Hill, and I was hired by...
So you wanted to remain...
I wanted to remain there, yes. I was in my element. This was definitely something, of course, I graduated with a degree in political science, and I was one of the few people that graduate with a degree in political science that actually did political science. So that was very, very interesting. Now, I had intended to go to law school, but I had noticed that a lot of the people that I had graduated with that came out of law school their first year had changed in a very real way, and not necessarily for the better. And I prayed, and I believe God was leading me in a different direction. And I really
be careful.
Yes.
The next person to interview is a lawyer.
Oh, okay, yes. Oh, all right. Well, I'll be careful there.
Just
yes.
kidding.
Well, and I know a lot of lawyers that I love very much. So I will
Good.
say that. And it's still, I was very. I mean, it was still very interesting to me, but I felt that God was just leading me in a different way.
Yes.
But I'm glad you told me. I won't say anymore. I really wasn't going to say anything bad. Well, so. So that led me into the political arena, but you don't get a political job right away. My first job on the Hill was a scheduler, but the scheduler is a person of influence.
Yeah, it's a kind of a gatekeeper.
Yes, you are the gatekeeper. And some people, they might, if they're a new lobbyist or they're someone new that don't really understand how the game is played, they dismiss you when they meet you at a reception. You're not important. My chief of staff, I remember, said, they're not getting anywhere near our boss because they don't know how to treat you. And they learned very quickly that if you want to get in to get your voice heard, now I was receiving lobbyists. I wasn't the one knocking on the door. I was the one responsible for opening it or closing it. And I enjoyed that work because I got to also work with the member of Congress, their wives, their families. Getting them to and from the district, making sure that everything, that they were to their votes on time. And I was in charge of the whip phone. The whip in the majority whip is someone who, the reason it came from the term, we're going to whip you into shape. It's making sure schedules run, and when a vote, sometimes votes are scheduled and we know when they're going to happen. Sometimes we know a vote's happening, but there's still some work being done, like in a committee, and we're waiting for it, and the members want to go home, but we can't go home until the vote happens. So, and that's when you had to have several tickets. It was harder then, so I had to have several plane tickets for my boss so he could fly home, but he couldn't fly home until the vote had occurred. And there was a phone. It was a rotary phone on top of the filing cabinet right by my desk, and I had to sit on that, and it could be 11:30 at night. But I had to, if we were expecting a vote, scheduler doesn't leave. So the phone would ring, I'd pick it up, and I'd get him to a vote. A very interesting time. We just went through a government shutdown here in the United States not too long ago around Christmas time. And it became the longest shutdown in history. But the longest shutdown in history before happened in the time that I was there. And it was funny because the constituents thought we were taking a vacation. And I got a phone call about 11:30 at night. I answered the phone, Congressman Miller's office. I worked for a member of Congress from Florida. My Florida connections came into play there, you can see. She was very angry. You guys are taking a vacation, and I said, ma'am, can I ask you a question? What time is it? Well, it's 11:30 Eastern time. Yes, 11:30 p.m. At night. Ma'am, did you get a machine? Did a machine answer the phone? Are you leaving a message? Well, that's a silly question. Of course not. I said, well, ma'am, what kind of a vacation can I possibly be taking if I'm sitting in my office at 11:30 on a Saturday night, mind you, answering a telephone? Oh. The thing is, I was, the essential employees, you think that it's this easy thing, and it's not. You're stuck. And she ended up calming down and talking to me about, she said, well, I'm very angry about this. I said, so are we. And, believe me, we want to go home, but we can't. And you're working those hours with no guarantee. It's kind of a myth. There is no guarantee you're getting paid. No, your check isn't coming at a regular time. And they do assure you, they do try to let you know that they do everything in their power to make sure you get back pay for the time you worked. But
sometimes the best efforts...
Sometimes it doesn't work that way. And so you're basically volunteering your time until things shake out and get resolved.
So Kellie, you came to know the world, this
Yes.
universe of high politicians and their staff, their aides, and their families, and everything, very, very close.
Yes.
You are part of that. So, in what ways did that influence your views, your understanding of how politics is made, things like that?
Well, I found it very exciting.
Yes,
Some
that's
people
obvious.
want to get away as far away from it as possible. But I
Yes.
found it extremely exciting, and I also found it very challenging because I was a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. I might not have been practicing as well as I should have, but if it's in your heart, it fights you every step of the way. You can try to get away from a foundation like that, but if it's truly there, and it was for me, and I was still surrounded by friends and family that were praying for me and encouraging me and worried about me being where I was. My brother called it Sodom and Gomorrah. So I mean, sort of the equivalent of, you were in a very challenging
So
situation.
what were
there.
some of the challenges, briefly? Some of the challenges.
And
Sabbath?
people understanding that you didn't want to work on Saturday.
Yes.
And sometimes I did, just to not, and sometimes I did break the Sabbath just so I wouldn't get challenged so much. But finally I said, if I'm convicted of this, I have to stick to it. So I started to become a little bit more disciplined about keeping the Sabbath, and people started understanding that, if you did a good job, you could pretty much, work that around that and make people understand.
Yes.
I also understood that it was a witnessing opportunity for me. I was in a very dangerous place for a Christian, but a very good place for a Christian to be if they're strong enough to serve as a witness. And then I suddenly felt an awesome responsibility. But politicians, the general rule is, honesty isn't exactly high up on your priority list. So the other challenge was, you would actually, you're not necessarily your member, but your chief of staff, the staff that's trying to make things happen, the staff that, at all costs, you've got to lie. You've got you've got to, tell them this instead. They'll get upset if you do that. It's like, I can't operate that way. There are ways to be honest and not upset people, but I had to find a way to work between the, and not ride the fence. I didn't want to be the lukewarm. It was very, very difficult. The other challenge was, I was only in my late 20s, but by comparison to the people that were coming up on the Hill out of college, I was old. And it was challenging because you're working with it's imagine me, are going now and working with the group of what we call millennials that are coming out of college and have a very interesting view of how things should be, but might not truly understand. And I had been there as well. I was still finding my way. I was still looking, but I was old enough also to know that what they were coming in with their attitudes were going to be very different than mine. And there would be some clashing. So getting along, working even with my own staff was difficult, because I not only had to gatekeep my boss, our boss, but I also had to keep them from him when he didn't want to deal with whatever they, sometimes he would even turn away his own staff. They had to. You couldn't have everybody's ear.
Sure.
And sometimes they had to speak through me or speak through our chief of staff. And many times you're telling people no, that don't want to be told no. But probably the biggest challenge was I think the great controversy. It's always going on in our lives, in our hearts, but I really felt it then. And my family was encouraging me to move off of the Hill. And I found that maybe I could do more from the other side, from the private sector, than I could in the public sector.
Still the lobbying work?
Yes.
But,
yes.
for the private sector.
I was hired off of the Hill. I was hired by a lobbying firm that worked one of their main clients was the country of Colombia. Very interesting, very different kind of work. But because of my connections on the Hill, you weren't always hired because you had a connection to their issue. You were hired because you had a connection to people. So because of my connections on the Hill, they hired me. I didn't work with that firm for very long because I found that some of the things the country of Colombia has some very controversial things going on. With drug trafficking, and now, don't get me wrong, everything we did was above board, and it just, some of the people that we had to work with, I was just not comfortable with that particular type of work. I love the lobbying part. I love being in Washington. We were renting an office from an investment banker, very vivacious man, self-made millionaire. Not lobbying at all. I mean, he did work, but he worked more of a financial aspect, and had a lot of influence in Washington as well, but a different kind. He was the money behind it, not necessarily with issues, but more with finance, and had done a couple of bank bailouts of his own, and really very, very successful man, but needed to a very strong-minded personal assistant, and offered me a very high salary to work for him. And I needed the funds, and I just started to sort of wonder where I was going with my life. I was sort of feeling a little bit unsure, and hadn't, once I got off the Hill, I just wasn't sure that where I was working at the time was the right place for me. So when he hired me, I thought that would be a good opportunity to just figure it out. And just be a personal assistant. Now, wasn't easy, but I sort of went back into more of an administrative capacity. But he also he was able to benefit from my connections, and I was able to benefit from his. And it was, he was very good, a very good boss. Had a large group to work for, but I was his confidant, his personal assistant. I managed a lot. I gained an awful lot of experience working for him. But after 2 or 3 years of working for him, I realized that he was calling me all the time. I was getting calls in church. I was everything, 24/7. And the stress level was extremely high. And while I was working for him, I bought my first house in Arlington, Virginia. And very happy, but still, it's like, this isn't what God wants me to do.
I see.
And I'm very qualified. I can do so much more than I'm doing, and I sort of feel like a glorified secretary. And he allowed me to take a leave of absence. He wanted me to come back. He says, figure out what you want to do and come back. You're going to come back to me. Well, while I was on that leave of absence, I started looking, and I really wanted to get back into government relations work. Private sector with Washington, D.C. And I kept looking, and I started interviewing with the American Kidney Foundation, and I felt myself going back towards health type environment, but health as it pertains to government. And I had a 60-day leave of absence, and I had about 60 days worth of savings. I had calculated this all out. And I was getting very close to the end of that 60 days, and I had many interviews, and one of them with the American Cancer Society. But I got a phone call that said, you're overqualified. I actually applied for an executive assistant position just to get my foot in the door, because I gave up on finding the government relations aspect. And they called and said, we can't hire you for that. You're overqualified. And wow, I've got maybe 2 weeks left of my money, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And I had called my office, and a woman that worked for my boss, did not want me back. He did. She intercepted the phone call and told me that he had already hired someone in my place. And it wasn't the truth, but I believed her. And I didn't have a job. As far as I knew, I had no job. I should have called him directly. I got chastised for that later. But God was in that. I didn't know. Looking back, I know what was happening there. God didn't want me to go back there. So as far as I'm concerned, he intercepted the phone call. The American Cancer Society actually told me, actually we have another job that we don't, it's not a job yet, but we need the position. So we're creating the position, but we have to start from within before we can go out. So there's a protocol where they have to look inside the organization first. They have to post the position. So they have to do that for 7 days. And I really wanted this job. When they described, it's like, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And it was the lobbying arm of the organization, it was the government relations office, and it was working for the National Home Office. So before I was even hired, I was invited to a reception to meet with all the executives of the American Cancer Society. And a new employee never gets that kind of access, but I did. And I wasn't even a new employee. But I was invited as a guest. I got to meet these wonderful people that really want this job. But I wasn't getting the call, and I wasn't getting the call, and we are now on the day I woke up, the morning of the 60th day.
Oh my.
The 60th day, it was a Friday. I need to start on Monday. I need to have a paycheck. And I prayed, and I prayed, and I cleaned my house like, I'm a maniac, because I had to get my mind off of it. Call's not coming, it's not coming. And I had also been sick all week to the point where I couldn't go out and look for other jobs. Like, I don't know what to do here, Lord. I mean, what do you have in store for me? I have nowhere to go. At 4:45 p.m., so 5 o'clock on Friday in Washington, you're lucky if, everybody's going home, if not already gone. So I'm thinking, man, it's not happening. So 4:45, I get the phone call. I got the offer, and they needed me to start right away, and I did. And it was a job I had so that was 1998, and I was hired in the government relations office, and I worked for the home office in DC and Atlanta from 1998 to 2005.
What were, very briefly, what were some of the highlights of your working for the American Cancer Society?
Well, when I first came on really within 4 days of my first day, the tobacco legislation was hitting the Senate floor. It had never made it past the House. Tobacco legislation to regulate tobacco had finally passed the United States House of Representatives. And there are two branches of, three branches of government, but two houses of Congress. Congress is, of course, the bigger, and then the Senate is sort of where bills die, or they live, one or the other. So we were needing to bring people from all over the country to Washington, D.C. to lobby for anti-tobacco legislation for an undisclosed amount of time. We needed hotel rooms in mid-May, and I was tasked with finding that hotel where we were going to be, and we ended up being there for 4.5 weeks and set up a war room. And a war room is, I'm sure you've heard of a war room, but a war room is really where you set up, it's command central, and this is where your people work in and out of, and you're giving them, you're paying for hotel rooms. But I remember asking if they had C-SPAN 2. So there's C-SPAN 1 and C-SPAN 2. C-SPAN 1 was where you could watch what was going on in the House of Representatives on TV. C-SPAN 2 is the Senate. Well, the hotel misunderstood me. And they came in, I'm like, that's C-SPAN 1. And I have people showing up that morning. And this is like my first job at this job. I mean, everything is on me. It's hinging on me. And I looked at the hotel staff, and we don't get C-SPAN 2. What? Because it was if you could get C-SPAN 1 sometimes, but depending on what kind of a package you had, I'm like, I don't care what you have to do, but we need C-SPAN 2, and I need it in 15 minutes. They went to the hotel next door and pulled a 500-foot cable to the hotel we were at and got C-SPAN 2. So I very quickly got a reputation of, if you want it done, she is going to get it done.
Finally, the new legislation was.
Well, we lost.
You lost at that
but
time.
The interesting thing that happens is you will lose. You can lose, but getting it into the Senate was a very big accomplishment. There are steps to things, and tobacco legislation wasn't just a change in policy or a change in laws. It was also a change in behavior. Trying to make people in America understand that this is about health, it needs to be regulated. This is something where, even though I'm conservative and more of a small government person, this is where I believe government can make a difference. Regulate tobacco, FDA call it an addiction, and we reached that as well. So having it, even getting in the Senate, even though we lost, the vote was close. And we knew that if we did it again and we kept pushing, that it would come back and we would have a very, very big chance, especially if Republicans got the majority again. Very big chance. Well, actually, so interestingly enough, it's not a conservative issue. The Republicans were funded more by tobacco. So you really want a Democratic-led Congress. And because we had a Democratic president at the time, it also made it easier to push that particular legislation and get the votes that you needed. But it was a very, very, very slim majority, so it was harder. The next time, and I was working for American Cancer Society when this happened, we got to watch legislation win for anti-tobacco and get restaurants, workplaces to finally get non-smoking, where you could walk into a restaurant and not be asked if you wanted the smoking or the non-smoking section. It was a big accomplishment. And 100 years of tobacco. I mean, Virginia, tobacco it's an economic issue as much as it is a moral issue.
Yeah. I think looking into retrospect, you have all the reasons to be happy. There are so big changes, and they not reflect only in the level of comfort as a non-smoker you have in restaurants, hotels, any public places, but it also reflects in the number of smokers all over in the United States.
Yes, and raising taxes, it was huge. We raised taxes. We were able to get taxes raised on
a few
tobacco.
Questions on the lobbying. There are many people who are quite skeptical about this kind of work. One of the objections they have is that lobbying tends to promote small group interests in the detriment of the general society. What do you say about that?
Well, one of the good things about what we did is we were really trying to affect public health. And really, our lobbying efforts were more grassroots and more coming up from the communities.
Yes.
That's the kind of lobbying that really can do some good. Is there some, or is there big money that comes into play? Of course. No matter what your issue is, there are going to be some that are pushing an interest that might not be for the general good and more for the personal good or the good of their particular constituency. And they are supposed to fight for their constituencies, but sometimes they're also, the difficulty is they're also fighting for re-election. So you have this balance. Is this going to be important for him, or if this member of Congress supports anti-tobacco legislation, but he has his district happens to be, or the state he represents happens to be a big, like Virginia. I said, I mean, that's tough. You can be an anti-tobacco, be on the side of regulating tobacco, but if you do, you're going to get voted out. So that is, finding that balance is very difficult. And yes, there are some of the bigger interests. Interestingly enough, I try to steer away from that. It's hard to do sometimes. I mean, I told you the other night that a gentleman that helped me meet a lot of people that put me in this field of work that I ended up working for the American Cancer Society, a job I probably would call a favorite job I ever had. He was a tobacco lobbyist, but he got me in the door, and he understood what he knew where I came from. I didn't. Some people here's where it's difficult. Somebody, when I was actually getting to know this particular person who had a lot of influence, I was told, don't tell him what you believe in. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna do that. I very, very quickly said, look, I don't believe in what you do. But he was very, very helpful to me and served as a mentor. He and his wife were, they took me under their wing. And I appreciated that. But I did get to the point where I had to distance myself because I was fighting for the other side. But DC, that area is all about influence, and that makes people very uncomfortable. Trying to be someone you're not, to make something happen that you believe in. The challenge for me was being who I was, whether it would benefit me, my career or not. But God was good, or is good, and it was everything, and everything in my power to maintain my integrity. Very difficult to do in DC. But if you can do it, you can make a lot of difference. And that's what I found. And it wasn't just me. I mean, I had a lot of people that I worked with, and I did get to a couple of people actually tell me, we can see a difference. There is a difference in you. We don't know how you get where you are, how you do what you do, how you deal with these people and still maintain the level of integrity that and the rest of us have had to sell our souls to, get a bill passed or work, and I didn't have to do that.
So this is the perception that all this is about give and take.
It can be, and there is a way to do that where it's not illegal or it's not even immoral. But there it is. There's the difference. There's ethics. There's legal. Being legal doesn't mean you're being moral.
Sure.
So being moral, it's that step, and it's very hard to take there. And when you start to feel the rub, and you start to feel like you have to compromise something that's too important to compromise, that's the time to step off.
You did do that?
I did.
Several times?
Yes. And the American Cancer Society was my niche. The American Cancer Society was where I could keep the Sabbath and be who I was. I had already established myself in Washington, and because of my Washington influences, that office was doing a lot of changing around, and I was a little bit concerned about my job. So I applied for a position here. They transferred me from the Washington home office to the headquarters here in Atlanta. And that's how I ended up with the best job I've ever had.
Yeah, I also think that a factor which could help those doing lobbying to work better and to avoid compromising moral principles would be for all citizens to use their rights and speak out and not commit everything into a few people who should speak on their behalf. On their behalf, yeah.
Well, in America, we have this wonderful thing called, which can also get us into trouble, called freedom of speech. And we've seen a lot of protests lately that have gotten nasty. But when they're not, when they don't get physical, protesting is also a form of lobbying. It is. It can be very effective, and it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money to do it. There are some protests out there that are funded by big money, and they're told what to say. If you are, in your heart, there's something that you believe in, and you are fighting it in some way, whether it be somebody you support, you're in their campaign office, whether it be, there is a way to make your voice heard. But if you're doing it because someone tells you this is what you need to believe, you're more of a puppet, that's where it's no longer in my opinion, effective, or you're not speaking your voice, you're speaking someone else's. So the trick is always speak what you believe, even if it's not the popular choice. Even if there are 100 protesters on that side or 100 people against you and there are 10, if the issue is good and it means something to you, stay with that. But it has to be from your heart. It will not... something that I learned when I was there, my relationship with God, day to day, was what kept me from losing, to use a phrase that, lose my religion, so to speak, lose my Christianity, lose my spot, lose my integrity, lose what was really part of me. So I always encourage people, I even encourage my son, if there's something you don't like, express it. But don't express it in an unchristian manner. Don't express it in Matthew 18. Oh my goodness. I mean, we all have that right. Matthew 18, if you have a problem with your brother, go to your brother. It's really what lobbying is. I have a problem with this. I need to make a change here. They're really talking about personal relationships, but it boils down to that verse.
Believe it
Did
or
that
not,
help? Did that answer your question?
Time is up.
Yes.
I
hope I answered.
many other things we could and we should have been discussing. So when are you going to be back in Atlanta for a second installment?
There is actually a time. We are going to go to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, with our Alpharetta group here. So we're flying in on the 8th of August, of the 7th or 8th of August. I haven't got my tickets yet. So if you'd like to schedule a time, we can maybe try to squeeze that in.
Yes. Thank you very much again, and may God continue to empower you, to guide you as you get ready for this big change in your life and the life of your family. God bless.
Thank you.